Hello, this is the AI Lab. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Anna Mills and Nate Angell. Anna is a college writing instructor and a leading advocate for AI literacy in education, building on her combined teaching experience and technical knowledge. And Nate is the founder of Nudgitall, a company that builds sustainability and growth at the intersection of communications, community, technology, and strategy. The reason? A paper they co-wrote entitled Are We Tripping? The Mirage of AI Hallucinations. Let's hear what Anna and Nate have to say. So Anna and Nate, so nice to have you with us. Why do you think that the term AI hallucination is so problematic? And how does your preferred term, Mirage, improve our understanding?
Mm. I mean, when we think of hallucination, I think we first think of an experience, um, a conscious experience, and a belief that something is real, right? And those are things that are not part of AI systems. There's no reason to think that AI is experience something, that it has a belief about what's real or what's not. Um, and so I think it misleads, it anthropomorphizes AI, and it also misleads us to think that this might be a fixable, technically fixable problem. Um, as a person might take medication for mental illness, that maybe AI could be induced not to hallucinate. Um, and so I think it plays on our tendency to project onto AI and to want to see it as sentient.
Yeah, agreed. And it was that anthropomorphization, which was a word I have a lot of trouble saying. Was one of the main. I think one of the main things that we were looking to counteract in looking for a different term. Um, it like as we've heard you explain in other contexts. The words that are used to describe different technologies can sometimes steer people off in directions in relationship to them that aren't really beneficial. And we feel like this idea of anthropomorphizing AI and also imagining that it works in a certain way, like with a consciousness that could be disturbed by a hallucination that might be fixed with some sort of, antidote, like Anna was saying, is that's the issue that we were struggling with. And so Mirage came up as an antidote to this. I see Anna's cat has joined us as well. My cat may join us as well. But we were, and in just a minute we'll explain the kind of process that she led to go through to find alternative terminology. But the reason that Mirage ended up being attractive to us as an alternative was partially because it externalized the operation that was happening both away from the AI and away from the perceiver or consumer of the AI outputs, but it involved them both. So just in the same way that a desert produces a mirage under certain circumstances, right? When the heat and the atmosphere and so forth all move together in a certain way, and there is an observer in the right position to see that mirage, then a mirage can happen, right? And the same with AI, right? There's a system at play, like the desert and the atmosphere, and it can produce a certain situation, which then can be perceived by an observer as being possibly misleading, for example, or inaccurate or counterfactual. And so a lot of that, another thrust of our reasoning was to locate the observer as a key player in this sort of network of meaning that's being generated, because it is the observer who ends up deciding whether or not the mirage is like an illusion or just the outputs of a system working as expected, if that makes sense.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I see your point about the mirage being more of an dependent on external factors that go beyond the machine itself, which kind of takes away the other word I liked someone using for hallucinations, but that is more an internal one, which is someone told me, well, they're not hallucinating, they're bullshitting. And I was like, Well,
Yes.
not even sure they have the capability to do that. I think they're just.
Yeah.
I do think there is an element of people pleasing with AI, as in they feel obliged to provide an answer even when they actually do not know what the answer is. Yes, I think that's the externality. I think is the important factor here that I see you identified, and that brings me to my second, which is that you didn't like pick Mirage just out of nothing. You actually looked at 80 other alternatives, I believe. So um, aside from the externality, what were maybe some of the other words you looked at, and why did you, not use them, and what made Mirage then stand out from the others?
Yeah. So I had launched these kind of social media discussions of possible alternate terms, including bullshit and bot shit and misprediction and confabulation, all kinds of things. And I decided at one point I need to systematize this, and I need to come up with criteria and actually see how these terms stack up against each other. And so I did come up with my own criteria, which included not implying that AI has intent or consciousness, um, implying that outputs don't match reality in some way, showing a connection to the patterns in the training data, ideally, um, but showing that AI can go beyond training data, that's not just copying it, um, and that the term would be accessible without too much explanation, and that it would be catchy and memorable. Um, and so I actually went through and rated each term numerically on each of those criteria, and just did kind of a simple averaging of that to see which terms scored the highest. And then I did just, I think, one or two chat sessions where I wanted to see what a chatbot would give me according to the same criteria. And it actually came up, ChatGPT actually came up with data Mirage. And so that was the first time we'd considered Mirage. And I was surprised to find that that did actually rank the highest according to my own scoring. Um, and that's when Nate and I started talking and really thinking, like, is Mirage a viable alternative? And we decided that it didn't, it was misleading to say data Mirage, because people would think the problem was in the data. And if you give it better data, it won't, um, come up with incorrect outputs. And that's not the case. So we ditched the data part and just landed on AI Mirage, and started to think about, making a case for actually using that term, but also for inviting ongoing discussion. And, we shared the spreadsheet of terms and said people can adapt it and change the criteria and use it in educational settings. So just really wanting to encourage kind of this ongoing interrogation of the metaphors that we use and the language that we use, and how they're affecting our relationship with AI. And so, yeah, and then I took that, we took those terms back to social media and, got even more suggestions, right? So people keep wanting to come up with suggestions of their own, and kind of continue to think about the implications. And that's great. Um,
So you've been using social media as the ultimate prompt for real intelligence feedback on the terminology. By any chance, what was 2 and 3 in your top three of words? What were the alternatives of Mirage that came in close
um,
seconds, for example?
yeah, it's interesting. Misprediction,
Hmm.
um, auto-synthesized Mirage, um, miscalculation, misinterpolation, paper mache made out of training data. That was from Emily Bender. Synthetic misinformation. So, and I think that we could probably play with the criteria more. We kind of realized as we were discussing Mirage how important it was that that centered the human
Mhm.
judgment. And that wasn't initially one of the criteria. We wanted something that didn't imply consciousness on the AIs, part, but really what emerged out of the process was this realization that we need to center human judgment and human agency, and the temptation to believe in AI, even when we know better, right? Even when we know how it works and we know it's wrong sometimes, there's still that temptation as it gets more sophisticated to say, wow, I think it really nailed it this time, And so a term that helps us counteract that and maintain our skepticism of these outputs and recognize that temptation. I think we were realizing how important that was as we looked at the terms.
And so looking at that process and looking at the importance of language, what would you like educators and journalists in mainstream press and policymakers, for example, to do differently based on this shift from hallucination to mirage, or maybe more generally based on the idea of being more conscious of the language they use and the impact it might have?
I mean, I guess since I want to toss it back to Anna actually, because she is working as an educator day to day now, and I'm not. So certainly when it comes to, I think our primary focus was on maybe making an impact with educators. And so that's a key part of what we're doing. But I'll just introduce that by saying that I think that more than any single term, one of the interventions that we were hoping to make was that by questioning the terminology of AI itself, that people could generate kind of like a greater engagement and literacy with how AI works. And so in a way, it doesn't really matter what you end up on. It's asking the question about, like, just asking the question whether hallucination is a useful and accurate term to use can spark a really interesting and valuable discussion that can get people like deeper into thinking about their relationship to the technology that just, using hallucination without any thought doesn't help with. But I know Anna uses AI and thinks about it really carefully in her work as an educator and with other educators all the time.
Yeah. And I think, that connection to AI literacy and, encouraging the practice, whether in educational settings or in broader discourse, to be really self-aware of how we interact with AI and what our assumptions are. And that is part of AI literacy, like noticing those dynamics and naming them and trying to make choices about them. So, and this kind of aims us more toward augmentation rather than AI for replacing labor. The idea is, how do we build systems and train ourselves to think about how we want to interact with them and stay in control and still be the ones making judgments and choices. Um, so I think, on one hand, it'd be great if teachers who are teaching AI literacy invite students to choose metaphors and analyze metaphors and argue for their favorite term. And, I think that that's a very fun and kind of exciting and kind of, it gives the student some sense of their own agency in relation to shaping their relationship with AI. So that's one thing that we would encourage. But on the brighter level, we can all do that in social media discussions, in talking about, our latest interaction with a chatbot. We can sort of choose and reflect on those terms anytime.
To that note, it's been interesting some of the reactions that we've gotten to publishing this work, and the publication of it was a whole saga and two of itself that we could talk about. But it's interesting. We get a range of different reactions. I would say that by and large, almost everyone that has reacted is dissatisfied with hallucination as a term. But there's a much greater variation in the degree to which people are willing to like entertain the idea that some sort of other term could be used. So we've had people like actually get angry that we have even dared to suggest a different term. Not so much because it's like they love hallucination so much, but they think it's a waste of time to be like concerned about the terminology when there are so many other important things to focus on with AI. And I agree. Like, I think there are many systemic things that we should be thinking about with AI, but I feel like I do believe in the power of the naming of the words that we use to talk about it as being an important factor in all that. I can imagine you do too, Caroline, given the book that you're writing.
To me, framing and the narrative that you use to define anything is crucial, because that's how then people react or do not react. And with AI, I think a lot of the words used are there to create emotions. Negative, positive, fear, trust, all kinds of emotions. And I don't think it's wrong to have emotions towards technology, but I think at some point it's good to also be very factual about technology and see what it brings. And Anna, coming back to some of the things you said, it made me think of that quote from Sam Altman, the uh, founder of OpenAI and ChatGPT, which said that AI is very good at doing tasks, not necessarily doing jobs. I think that's the way I look at those things, is as long as you accept that what they do is a task, but they're not replacing people and doing jobs. I think that's a more reassuring way to look at it. I'm not saying you shouldn't be worried, but there's always a silver lining, I'm sure.
Yeah. I just think that, still having some hope that we have a choice about what terms to use is representative of having hope that, these systems are still being shaped, and there's still so many uncertainties about how they're going to evolve, and we can be involved in that, right? It's not one inevitable outcome. AI is not one thing, one endpoint. This is still a phenomenon that we're shaping, including how we interact with it, what it's for, how we design the systems. And so, just making a choice to use a different word sends a message that, yes, we are shaping it. We are participating in shaping that future. And it's not over, right? We don't have to just capitulate and accept the term that's used. We don't have to accept somebody's vision of what AGI is going to be in 5 years. We're all shaping this. So I hope it's sort of a hopeful act in that sense.
Well, I mean, it certainly is nice to know that we're still in control of language, and that we're still allowed to not simply replicate the words that are offered by either the marketing divisions of AI companies or creative journalists that find interesting metaphors, but that might, as you said, as the systems evolve, show that those metaphors have their limits or do not really cover the full reality of what's happening. And I think I agree with you also, Nate, that challenging the words used means that we think about the processes that are at stake, what is happening. And that is a good and healthy thing to do, I think, with AI or any technology, is to try and understand what's happening in the black box. And does it really need to be black? I mean, maybe it's more transparent than we think, and maybe it can be made more transparent so that we understand it better.
Yeah, and that's led to another. There's been another sort of little pushback by some folks who will point out that there's a way in which Mirage doesn't just describe those moments when AI gives us something that we're not expecting or don't want, but it also just describes every AI output. Like, AI doesn't use different, well, and AI is a big category, but generative AI that most people are using today, like with chatbots, doesn't use different processes to generate what we would deem a correct output than it uses to generate what we would deem an incorrect output, right? And so they're like, why would we use Mirage to describe some of the outputs? Aren't all the outputs a Mirage in a certain sense? And I guess my answer to that has been that I think it's useful for us as humans who are interacting with these systems to have different words for those outputs that we do deem as like unexpected or incorrect or counterfactual. Like, it helps us to have that word to be able to talk about when AI mirages, as opposed to just like dumping all of its outputs into one big basket that we can't differentiate.
Well, thank you, and thank you for confirming that you can make it a verb.
Yes.
I was wondering
Yes, we
about
make a point about
that.
that. Yeah, that was a big. We realize it's a little weird to use miraging as a verb, but we talked about that in the paper.
Hey,
But
we Google.
yes, very important.
You can make anything into a verb.
Exactly.
Okay, well, Anna, Nate, thank you so much. I'm certainly one of the readers that is very grateful for what you wrote, and I think that I would have imagined you would have had pushback on the choice of word because it was French, but it's good to know that that was not the the factor of discontent.
Haven't heard that one yet. No, but
You know,
maybe now it will come.
at the end of the day, I'm grateful that a Latin word made it, and I look forward to seeing the thinking evolve on this, and maybe also Anna to see how you can continue enhancing AI literacy in education. Thank you so much, both of you.